Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 738 for November 4th, 2018. This time around, I'm in Kilkenny, Ireland, and later on Whiskey Cast in Depth, I'll talk with Eddie Langton and Jim Rafferty. Eddie owns the Langton House Hotel, and Jim owns the Dillon Whiskey Bar, where we're recording this episode. They're the co-chairs of the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild, a network of 9 local bars and 1 retail shop devoted to promoting Kilkenny as a whiskey destination. That's coming up in just a few minutes, along with the calendar of events, your voice, the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and more, along with a tribute to a friend the whiskey community lost this week. That's all ahead on this edition of Whiskey Cast.
Whiskey Cast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's start with the news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. We don't normally do this, but this time around, we're going to focus the entire news segment on one story: the death of Master Distiller Dave Pickerell Thursday evening in San Francisco. The rumors started spreading Friday morning on social media, and the publicists who worked with Dave on many of his brands wound up having to confirm his death, even though some of his relatives and at least one client had not been notified privately first. Dave was in San Francisco for Friday night's Whiskey Fest, sponsored by Whiskey Advocate magazine, and had spent the day Thursday visiting bars and retailers on behalf of his clients, including the new blackened American whiskey he created in collaboration with the members of Metallica. According to publicist Danielle Eddy, Dave returned to his hotel room to rest after wrapping up that afternoon's schedule, and was found that evening in his room, dead from natural causes. Funeral arrangements are still pending, but in addition to what will likely be a private service in Kentucky, there are plans for a series of memorial services around the U.S., and since I'm here in Ireland, let's think of them as wakes, where Dave's friends and fans can raise a glass in his honor. We'll have details on those services as they become available. I want to put Dave's career in perspective for you. After he graduated from West Point in 1978 with a degree in chemistry, he served in the Army while getting his master's in chemical engineering from the University of Louisville. After he left the Army in 1989, he joined a distillery consulting firm in Louisville, and one of his clients was Bill Samuels Jr. at Maker's Mark. Bill thought so much of Dave that in 1994, he hired Dave away from the consulting firm to essentially run the entire distillery as Vice President of Operations and Master Distiller. In a statement, Bill and Rob Samuels sent their condolences to Dave's family, and I'm quoting now, "Dave was an accomplished and important figure in bourbon. He certainly made a mark on the industry he loved, and will truly be missed." After Dave left Maker's Mark in 2008, he started his own consulting firm, Oak View Spirits. The headquarters was in Dave's suitcase, since he traveled the world working with startup distilleries and entrepreneurs trying to build whiskey brands. Just a few of those brands: Whistle Pig Rye, J. Rieger & Sons, Hill Rock Estate, and Blackened Whiskey, along with more than 100 other clients and partners. He also spent 18 years working with Mount Vernon in Virginia and the Distilled Spirits Council on the restoration of George Washington's distillery and overseeing the distilling program there for many years. Fred Minnick of Bourbon Plus magazine and I both knew Dave as a friend, and we spent a few minutes on the phone Friday after the news came from San Francisco. He was the Johnny Appleseed of craft whiskey, wasn't he?
Dave Pickerell, I believe, was probably the most talented distiller in the world because he touched so many different stills and mashes. If I ever had a question on what a grain would taste like distilled, I would text him. And I think the guy seriously distilled every single grain known to man, because there was not a grain that he didn't know about. And the flexibility that he had as a distiller was just uncanny. The one thing that I wish he could have done was clone himself and keep people like him at the distilleries he worked for or that he helped consult with, because after he would leave, you would see a drop off in the quality. And I've had many people tell me he's the sharpest distiller in the world, and this is a huge loss for all of whiskey.
And he was one of those guys you could ask him anything and he'd know about it.
I'm pretty sure he knows who really shot JFK. That guy really did know everything. He was just he was a bucket of knowledge. You'd have a conversation with him, and you would learn something new about him every time. And he could spin a yarn. Now, don't get me wrong. He could run the BS as well as anybody in whiskey. But when it came to the distillation and science of whiskey, I'd have put him up against anybody.
And when he was running the BS, he let you know he was running the BS. He never tried to actually BS anybody.
No, one of my favorite stories, and he just told me about this, was that he once goaded a brand into suing one of the whiskeys he was a part of, so they could get the press out of it, and they played played dumb in that. And so he was a tactician with his BS. So he would use it wisely to his his company's benefit.
And of course, he had no ego whatsoever. I mean, he would do anything for fun. He was all about having fun with this.
Yeah, and I think too that he worked too much. He worked too hard. He worked too much. He lived out of a suitcase, and he was go. And I think that when you have that kind of personality where you want to help everybody, I think sometimes that at the end of the day can really be costly to yourself. And that guy would do anything for you. I mean, if I could have 3 weeks ago, I could have called him and said, "Hey man, my car's broken down. Can you come give me a lift?" And if he was in the area, he would. I mean, hell, if he was 3 states over, he probably would have. I mean, he was just that kind of guy. And he didn't always need to get something out of you either. And that was the thing about Dave. He cared about people in this business, in the bar world and the distilling world. He was a great guy. As I mentioned at the start, Dave Pickerell was in San Francisco for Whiskey Fest, but also because that's where his newest baby, Blackened American Whiskey, is based. Dave worked closely with the members of Metallica to create Blackened. He told us about the black noise process he came up with to bring out specific flavors in the whiskey back in September during episode 727. John Bolello is the CEO of Smooth Amber Spirits, the company Metallica's members created to make Blackened, and he was the one who recruited Dave to join the team and the band. We talked on Friday, and as you'll hear, Dave may be gone, but the whiskey and Dave's contributions will live on.
The whole timing of the introduction of Blackened was to coincide with the September 2nd launch of the band's tour in Madison, Wisconsin. And from a spirits point of view, that really worked well for us, right? Because smaller markets, you can overspend, you can learn what you're doing right, learn what you're doing wrong. The thing that we quite frankly completely underestimated was in these small markets how Dave would be received. Because as you'd expect, in mixologist communities like New York and San Francisco, everybody knows Dave. In Madison, the hardcores know him, but most not so much. And as you can appreciate, the guy, I mean, he's just so larger than life and so endearing that we did several store signings and we did samplings on premise. And he just blew it out to the point where we were just blown out. This is where we launched a brand new product. He did signings that, the owners of the stores had bought, 5 or 10 cases. He sold them out in 10 minutes to the point where retailers, customers, many of them band members in for the show, were going to other retail stores buying bottles to bring him back just so Dave could sign them. And he used to relate with regard to being around the band and the concerts. He goes, it's sunshine to my ears. First of all, he was a Metallica fan, which I never knew until I first met him. And secondly, that whole sonic enhancement, black noise issue, that was Dave's idea, and it came from his West Point days, where, and I wasn't aware of this either. And as you know, Dave was an amazing storyteller, and he always had a story for everything. And one of his stories that he first told me, where he got this idea, was West Point apparently houses one of the largest organs in the world. And he made fast friends with the organ player. And he was giving Dave a demonstration one day. And Dave said, that key, is that high or low? And he goes, that's low. He goes, can you hit it? He goes, yeah, I can hit it. He goes, but I can only hold it so long because it could literally shake this foundation to pieces, right? And the guy hit it for about 4 seconds or so, and Dave was intrigued how it literally, to use Dave's term, he said it would shake your guts. So when my creative director, Jimmy North, and I met with Dave literally at Whiskey Fest in 2017, right? So it's just about a year ago today, we made Dave to pitch him to work with us. And he told that story, and he said, I want to use Metallica's music because it's so bass-driven. And he talked a lot about the fact that, with American whiskey barrels and any spirit that uses a charred barrel, you've got the char up front, which, that actually is burns some of that caramel and so forth. But right behind that char is the red line, and that's where you've got all this flavor, caramel and vanilla and so forth, but it's unaffected, right? And he wanted to access that, and it was his firm belief that if we did this right, we could interact with the whiskey, with the wood at the molecular level and access that red line and the flavors that were with it. And God bless him. We hooked up with Meyer Sound, who is the professional sound company that not only provides speakers and sound systems for Metallica, but many other arenas and bands all over the world and country. And we've got a patent pending with them because the fact is that this is doable, and this is all Dave. So really an amazing guy.
What did you guys think when you heard the news this morning?
We were devastated because anybody that knows Dave knows that, yes, he's arguably the preeminent master distiller in the United States. Having said that, he's a wonderful person, and he's a huge friend. And, the band and he hit it off immediately because they respect each other's craft. When I was first brought on to run Sweet Amber, the first thing that Lars Ulrich, the Metallica drummer, had said to me was, listen, we know what we know, which is music. We don't know spirits. And we need someone to drive our vision. And I knew that to avoid Blackened being just another celebrity brand, we had to ground that in authenticity. The guys in the band wanted the best that was available, right? But I knew even if it were the absolute best whiskey on the market, if it wasn't grounded in some authenticity, it would fall flat as a celebrity brand. And Dave was the only choice. So we approached Dave, and as I stated earlier, he was absolutely thrilled about it. But what was even better was when the 5 of them met, You know, they just hit it off. He had such respect as a fan for their craft. And actually, their very first meeting, they flew him over because they were doing the European tour at that point. So they flew him over to Stockholm, Sweden. And we were also doing a photo shoot for a video that we were doing that, of course, both Dave and the band were in. And they got to meet on set. And then the band had thrown an after party after the show that night. So Dave attended the show, and then we all got together at the after party where they could really do some bonding. And it was really sweet because the five of them really hit it off. Dave loved being the fifth member of Metallica, so to speak. And as I stated earlier, he used to say, there's sunshine coming out of my ears. And the guys had such an affinity for his craft, because I remember the first time that he actually mixed up Blackened. We were at Metallica's headquarters, and 2 days later, he did a private tasting at Lars Ulrich's house for him and some friends, and it was just a wonderful marriage and friendship, beginnings of friendship to witness. And so, to answer your point, when we heard, we were devastated on multiple levels. The guy taught them so much about whiskey, and they shared with his craft, and they did 2 videos together where they both got to interact with their respective crafts, and it was really something to witness, quite frankly.
I know it's too soon, really, to even ask this, but David told me back in September that there were plans to build the distillery in the Bay Area, that he'd already arranged for the stills and stuff to be shipped from Hill Rock when their new stuff arrives.
Yes.
Does that go ahead?
That does go ahead. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that one of the things I should say on our agenda this weekend was tomorrow morning at 9:00, the band's management and business partners, Dave and I, were supposed to travel up. We found a really, what we think is a great prospective distillery at the site. We already, as you stated, we already own the stills. We're looking for the right location. We want it in the Bay Area because the band is based here. And tomorrow was the site visit to get Dave's stamp of approval. So to answer your question, yes, that will move forward. One of the things that's also we were in town for, in addition to Whiskey Fest, is the band has their own charitable foundation called All Within My Hands. And it's about sustainable communities. It's about job training. It's about sustainable growth with regard to food banks and feeding the hungry and so forth. Tomorrow night at the Masonic Center is the band's first benefit, so to speak, where they're doing an acoustic set. Dave was one of the guests to attend, and there's a silent auction. And there were several items in that auction that involved Dave. One was, or actually there were a couple of Dave-hosted private whiskey tastings at different locations. And then another thing, which was really cool, was he had given us one of his signature black felt hats to auction off with a signed bottle of Blackened with he and the 4 bandmates. We actually pulled that piece of the auction because his hat is so iconic that whenever we do build this distillery, we're going to call it the Dave Pickerell Distillery, and we're going to proudly display that his felt hat as a tribute to him.
I'm going to try to see if I can play you a piece of audio from my last interview with Dave. So what was more fun, all the years at Maker's Mark or doing the Metallica project?
All I can say is, on the cover of the Rolling Stone, gonna buy 5 copies for my mother. How can I not say that that's fun as hell? I love Maker's Mark. I still call it we. But oh my God, this boy from the slums got his picture with Metallica in the Rolling Stone. What's not to love about that?
I think he had as much regard for you guys and the band as you guys did for him.
Well, that's lovely to hear. I mean, and you actually gave me chills, and he was virtually on tour with us, so we became close. All of us, my team, he and the band. He loved going backstage. He just loved it. He loved meeting new people, and the reality is we were on our way to becoming quite the family, and there's not much that we can say that hasn't said, other than the fact that there are very few people in life that walk the talk, and Dave was someone who was proud of saying that he did business by handshake. He was a true gentleman. He was a man of his word. He was an amazing artist in the spirit that he created. But most importantly, he was a dear and wonderful person, and just a good person who enjoyed being around people, and we'll miss him just terribly.
We'll have some of the comments about Dave Pickerell's death that have been coming in from around the world later on, and I'll have a few thoughts as well. We'll have more whiskey news to report next time around. Hopefully, happier things to report. But until then, you can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Valknut is the latest release in Highland Park's Viking series, and the name comes from the Valknut. It's a mark said to have been placed on worthy Viking warriors to ensure their safe passage into Valhalla after dying in battle. If there's anyone worthy of the Valknut today, it is Dave Pickerell. Check out the entire range of whiskeys at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Before we get to the calendar of events, there's a new episode of the Whiskey Cast Tasting Panel available to download now. We had a great time the other night with members of the Monmouth Whiskey Club in New Jersey tasting bottled and bond bourbons. After that episode, the members of the Pittsburgh Whiskey Friends invited us to come over for a tasting panel sometime. But that was just as news was breaking last Saturday of the mass shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, in which 11 people were killed. We are now working with the Pittsburgh Whiskey Friends to do what we can for the community. I'll be leading a special whiskey tasting in Pittsburgh November 26th to raise money for HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which works to help refugees settle in the United States and had close ties to the Tree of Life Synagogue. All of the proceeds from the event will go to the society, and we'll be raffling off one seat on the tasting panel for the podcast we'll be recording that night. We'll be posting more details on the Whiskey Cast website and on our social media feeds as things get firmed up. But if you're anywhere in the Pittsburgh area, I hope you'll join us that night in memory of the victims of last weekend's tragedy. Time now for the Whiskey Cast calendar of events. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts, just west of Boston, will be busy this week. There's a Peerless Rye single barrel release party with Corky Taylor on Thursday night, November 8th. And the next night, Middleton's Billy Layton and David McCabe will be there for a tasting as well. Whiskey Live Manila is this coming weekend in the Philippines, along with Glasgow's Whiskey Festival in Scotland. And tickets go on sale Saturday for the Victoria Whiskey Festival coming up in January in Victoria, British Columbia. I'll be in Fredericton, New Brunswick for the New Brunswick Spirits Festival, November 13th through the 17th. Tickets are still available, and I hope to see you there. The International Whiskey Festival is November 16th through the 18th at The Hague in the Netherlands. The Birmingham Whiskey Festival is November 24th in England, and the annual Drambusters Whiskey Festival is also on the 24th in Dumfries, Scotland. Right now, we have 142 different events on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a festival, a tasting, or other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form on our website to let us know about it. We'll be glad to add it to the list.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex, for every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume, imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Whiskey Cast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. Once again, I'm in Kilkenny, Ireland this weekend, and we're recording this episode at the Dillon Whiskey Bar in Kilkenny. You might think it's named for Dylan Thomas, the legendary Irish writer, but it's actually a tribute to Bob Dylan, though they don't have his Heaven's Door whiskeys on the menu here. This is one of the 9 bars and 1 retailer that make up the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild. Their goal is to not only promote Irish whiskey, but make Kilkenny a must-see visit for whiskey lovers traveling to Ireland. Eddie Langton and Jim Rafferty are the Guild's co-chairs. Eddie owns the Langton House Hotel, just down the street from here, while Jim is the owner of the Dillon Whiskey Bar. We got together at another one of the Guild's members, the Kilkenny Hibernian Hotel Bar, just down the street.
It started in a room with a couple of guys, basically speaking about whiskey and about how we could improve the offering that Kilkenny had for Irish whiskey. We have a long heritage in Kilkenny here of with the publicans working well together with festivals and stuff like that. So it was a natural thing that guys to come together and join teams, join forces, and start off the Whiskey Guild, Kilkenny Whiskey Guild. So it happened about 2.5 years ago, and then 2 years ago it came into its own, where 9 bars and 1 off-license, off-sales, came together. We selected the particular bars for the quality of the brand and the service that they were able to provide across the board, and it basically happened from there. So Eddie is chairman and I'm co-chairman of it, and there was 9 other guys 8 other premises on the team. And then we met with a guy called Cyril Briscoe, who had done some work with Galway Whisky Trail. And Cyril came on board with us as well, and we laid down the foundations of what is now Kilkenny Whiskey Guild.
Eddie, tell me about the heritage of Irish whiskey here in Kilkenny, because it goes back a long time, but the bars hadn't always taken it seriously, have they?
No, probably not. I don't think probably most of Ireland hadn't taken Irish whiskey seriously for a number of generations. To be fair, we're in a very unique position here in Kilkenny, because we discovered through our research when we were setting up the Whiskey Guild that the first mention of aquavita, the first mention of distillation in Ireland comes from Kilkenny. There was a church manuscript produced in 1324, the Red Book of Ossory, by Bishop Ledred, who was the bishop in Canice's Cathedral here in the city. He produced a church manuscript basically about church life, but listed in that was actually a recipe for aquavita, and it's the first mention of aquavita. And aquavita, of course, becomes Ishkava in the Gaelic, which becomes whiskey, anglicised across the world. So we're suggesting that the first distillation in Ireland, well, certainly the first written account of distillation in Ireland, starts here in this city where we are right now. So that begins the journey. Now, initially it begins with a grape distillate. It's coming through the monks sharing ideas across Europe. So it begins with a grape distillate, but that eventually will become a grain distillate and becomes whiskey as we know it. So it's potential that we're in the home of whiskey worldwide, potentially, here in Kilkenny.
But you don't have any distilleries here in Kilkenny.
Not anymore, no. And this is part of the Irish legacy of distillation as well. There would have been a number of distilleries in Kilkenny City. There was a distillery on the side of my premises, the pub we're in actually, would you believe, up to the 1850s. Now there's many reasons for that. So Ireland was the hotbed of whiskey worldwide, and Mark, you know this of course as well. Before Scotch, before the American Whiskey Revolution as well. So we were producing quite a huge amount of whiskey and exporting it throughout the world. But then we were knocked back by a couple of factors. We began with the Father Matthew temperance movement in the 1820s, 1830s, where the church in Ireland asked the people or put out the word to suggest maybe cut back on their alcohol intake, and a lot of people took the pledge at that time. So that was a huge kind of knock-on effect, obviously, for local sales. We move into other aspects and other problems. We had then, of course, prohibition in the States. We have piracy of Irish whiskey, of course, in America as well, which would have been our biggest market as well. So Irish whiskey began to get a bad name as well through the piracy and prohibition times as well. Then when we moved out of the Commonwealth, we were still part of the Commonwealth even when we set up the Irish nation in the 1920s. But in the 1940s, Ireland decided no more, we're not part of the Commonwealth with the British Empire. And that led to taxation. So we had been on a favourable tax system throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the English Empire, massive, obviously, the British Empire, I should say. And as soon as we pulled back from the Commonwealth, they taxed our exports. They taxed our whiskey as one of those, of course. So then we through those various times, we went from dozens and dozens of distilleries throughout the countryside of Ireland down to where we only had 3 existing distilleries in the 1970s. So we were, yes, in Kilkenny, there's no existing distillery. Well, there will be distilleries, actually. We have Ballykeefe opening very soon, and we have Watches just up the road from us as well. But we were like many Irish cities and country and county towns as well, where we went from distilleries to nothing.
Jim, how did the diversity of bars within the Guild grow? Your bar, the Dylan Whiskey Bar, is focused on Bob Dylan, not Dylan Thomas, the great Irish author. And there's Paris, Texas, just around the corner from here at the Hibernian Hotel, where they specialize in Southwestern American food. This is not the kind of stuff you expect in a typical Irish town.
No. I suppose the way we looked at it, as I said, in the Dillon we opened up 9 years ago, 9.5, and we wanted to bring Irish whiskey. We wanted to bring whiskey to Kilkenny. And in doing so, we had a broad spectrum, basically from Irish, Scotch, right across to bourbons, American, Canadian, you name it. And we just found that tourists, Kilkenny being a tourist town, very strong influence tourist town, that they were coming here and they were looking for Irish whiskey. They didn't want the bourbons, they didn't want the Scotches. So what we have done basically is cut down our offering to mainly Irish whiskies, and in doing so the Guild clicked into this as well. So basically for the Guild and the Guild House members, we put a plan together to have 60 premium Irish whiskey offers, 40 standard pours, 10 premium pours and 10 super premiums, and everyone got on board. They wanted to do this. The scene we'll have a whiskey.
We are sitting here in the lobby, I should note, at the Hibernian Hotel, and we've just had a round of whiskeys delivered, and I'm not sure, what do we got here? The Writer's Tears. We'll never complain about that since they are one of our sponsors on the show. So, sláinte, gentlemen. And Eddie, how important has the tourism angle become to the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild? Because, as Jim mentioned, this is a tourist town for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's a massive tourist city. Kilkenny has been for many, many years, well before we set up the Whiskey Guild. And I suppose what one of the aspects of the Whiskey Guild is to provide an education to the tourists coming through. So it's not just, we've embraced the whiskey revolution that's happening across Ireland in the last 20 or 30 odd years now at this stage. And we are there. We're trying to create a favourable environment for a customer or a tourist. The local trade is very important to us as well, of course, but the tourists, people coming in from Dublin, Cork, from international visitors as well, that they can come to any of our member houses, the guild houses. They will receive a massive selection. There's training with the staff. The staff have been trained so they can give some education as well to the customer. And yeah, so we've embraced all aspects of our customer base, our clientele base, from local, national and international. But tourism is very important to us, and the whiskey, yes, it probably helps us be successful because of the volume of people coming through Kilkenny City. It does allow us to, and you'll see the bars here, we've all been able to maybe to spend on our bars and our premises and to bring them to a standard we feel is quite unique in Ireland, to be fair. I think Kilkenny is one of the best offerings of bars and pubs throughout the whole country of Ireland, and in a small unique atmosphere as well. You can walk around this city within half an hour from one end of the the city to the other end of the city. You'll take in 30 or 40 really, really good bars. There's only 10 on the Guild membership for various reasons, but it's a great city to be in. It's a great city for tourism. It's a great city to grow up in, to be frank, as well, to be really.
And Jim, it's gotten a lot easier to offer more premium Irish whiskies in the last 5 to 10 years, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The quality and the standard of the whiskies, Irish whiskies that's out there now is just incredible and changing. We started off with 80 Irish whiskies on the shelf, and now we've 210, I think, at this stage. And that seems to be the norm in a lot of the bars around the place, where you can go in and you don't just have your standard 3 base brands. You've moved up onto the next level to your Caskmates and your Jameson and your Irishman and your Riders Tier and your Green Spot. Like, these are whiskies that just weren't there 10, 15 years ago, now, like a standard pour is what would have been a premium whiskey 10 years ago. And it's all down to the training. It's information to the staff, coming from distilleries, coming from podcasts and gentlemen like yourself, which is fantastic. And it's all learning. We're learning on an ongoing, on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis on all this. In the Guild itself, we've emphasised a huge amount on training the staff, giving them the knowledge in order to push an experience towards the customer, and they've all embraced it, and it's been fantastic, and it's ongoing, it's continuous. Like, we're looking for new stuff and new things to do all the time, and Irish whiskey is just after opening the doors to us.
You've also had the opportunity now to bring more consumers into this training through a membership program. Tell me how that works.
So this is our first year to run a membership. It's our second year in existence. So we put out the membership last December to see would there be much of a take-up on it, and we sold out those membership availabilities by the end of January. So what we've done is we've created 50-odd members. We run an event once a month, guaranteed once a month in each house. It revolves. So we have 10 houses, and it moves from house to house to house. We pick a distillery to work with us on that event, and again, we have many partners across the Irish whiskey world. So it could be Irish, it could be Powers brand, which is our next event coming up in Matt Miller's next Thursday. It was Bushmills in my house only a couple of months ago. It was Method of Madness in Jim's there a couple of months before that. Tullamore. So we have an event hosted by a distillery. Our members get a preferential rate to come to that event. We obviously encourage non-members as well to come along and take up a ticket. And they're really unique nights. They're really good. So it is a whiskey champion from our distilleries. Will come down, will lead us through education about the product that's in front of us. We'll usually do a tasting of an average 5 or 6 whiskies. We each house will create a bespoke cocktail, usually 2 cocktails as well. We do a bit of food pairing. So we feel it's a really good night. It's a really good social occasion. And plus you're getting 50 or 60 boys and girls in a room who have a love or an interest of whiskey. So it's a great social evening of exchanging ideas, of asking questions, of just creating a great social night out in terms of with whiskey in mind.
Jim, what advice can you offer to other cities, both within Ireland and in other whiskey producing areas, that would like to do something similar to this?
It's all about information, really, and it's about being able to portray that information to the customer. Brand ambassadors that come into us from each different distillery are fantastic in relaying the information about their products. What I say is that, learn from that. Right? Encourage the staff, encourage your customers to read the bottle, to read the literature, see what's going on. I think there has to be a set of standards put in place for each individual house. It's very important. And to kind of stick by them, like a gold shield standard, and it has to be judged, So we would have members go around to each other houses just to make sure that they're on the ball, they're on the game, and things are happening, and nobody's losing any sort of a pace at all. But my big advice would be that read the bottle, get to know the product, and give an experience that you won't forget.
One final question, Eddie. Are you surprised by what we've seen in Irish whiskey in the last 5 to 10 years with the boom and sort of the revival and really maybe the third golden age of Irish whiskey, as some of the distillers have referred to it.
If I'm honest, I didn't envisage it when I grew up in a bar. So I was born in 1975, above a bar in the middle of Kilkenny City, and there was always whiskey sales, but it was an older man's drink, and it was 3 or 4 products, as Jim mentioned, on your bar counter, and it wasn't fashionable, it wasn't trendy, so it wasn't being taken up by the new generations coming through. It was dying. The Irish whiskey was dying. So back in the 80s, back in the early 90s, no, I didn't see this coming. I really didn't envisage what was happening. Now, Irish Distillers and Jameson and Pernod Ricard have a lot to be thanked for when Pernod Ricard took over Irish Distillers in the late 80s, and they pushed hard with Jameson, and they created a want, a need. When we introduced brands like Redbreast, and it became a bit of a fashionable product around the world as well, obviously being sought after in the States and other collectors in various territories. And I think all of the distilleries then started to, okay, there's something going on here. So then we have some pioneers like Walsh's, built a new distillery outside of the 3 original distilleries. Dingle, Oliver Hughes and the guys down there, new distilleries like that coming online. So the last 10 years, probably you could see that starting up, all right, certainly. But 20 years ago, no, I didn't expect this. I certainly didn't expect this. I didn't expect the trade, the volume. And it's not just whiskey lovers out there. Like, whiskey is a popular spirit over the counter amongst every age group now, to be fair. It's not just, it's certainly left alone its age profile, which was and forgive me to categorise it, but it was an older man's drink in the bar. But now I'm seeing boys and girls, or men and women I should say, not boys and girls, forgive me, from their 20s right up to their whatever age, into their older age, embracing whiskey. Now, of course, with reason, of course, you have to. It's a spirit. You have to mind yourself with whiskey. Of course, you do, like any spirit. But it's great, and there's so many various things happening with the whiskey distilleries in Ireland. There's so many different woods being used now. I feel we're quite innovative in Ireland, to be fair, and not afraid to take a chance. You know, with the Method of Madness with Irish Distillers, or the Acacia wood up in Bushmills. They're really the Muscat in Teelings. They're trying different things. So it's really exciting. Really, and I think we're only starting off. I think this is going to continue this journey over the next generations, to be fair. I think we really are, as you said, a third golden age, and I don't see that coming to an end.
One final question for you, Jim, that may be somewhat cheeky, but for a tourist who's coming to Ireland for the first time, what's the worst thing they can do when they walk into an Irish whiskey bar?
Mix it with tonic. That's the trend at the moment. Seemingly, they're putting grapefruit and lemon and tonic into whiskies. I don't know. I suppose you have it as you enjoy it, I suppose, but that's a no-no for me, anyways.
Makes the Irish car bomb almost look good.
It does. It certainly does. Yeah. No, like the old traditional way of and probably one of the more popular ones is having hot toddies. An Irish whiskey, a hot Irish whiskey is fantastic. That'll be on a cold night. You won't get much better.
Their next guild meeting is this coming Thursday night, November 8th, and they'll be tasting Powers whiskies. On top of that, the guild is bottling a 15-year-old single cask of Powers that will go on sale next month at the 9 Pubs and the Wine Center, the guild's retailer member. Thanks to Jim Rafferty and Eddie Langton for spending some time with us on WhiskyCast In Depth. And full disclosure, I'm here in Ireland this weekend as a guest of Irish Distillers for a Powers press trip this week. WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic 16-year-old Lagavulin, the Distillers Edition, the throwback 8-year-old, and this year's edition of the cask strength Lagavulin 12-year-old at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. As you might guess, I've been tasting some Irish whiskies this weekend. Let's start off with the Irishman Single Malt from the Walsh Whisky Company. It's bottled at 40% ABV, and the nose is malty and floral with touches of dried flowers, honey, and freshly cut grass. The taste starts off creamy and smooth with barley sugar and vanilla notes, followed by a nice burst of allspice and white pepper spices, touches of citrus, and hints of dried flowers and butterscotch in the background. The finish, long and gentle with subtle spices, dried flowers, and honey. I'm scoring the Irishman Single Malt a 91. Let's turn now to the West Cork Distillers 10-year-old Single Malt. It's also bottled at 40% ABV. The nose has notes of barley sugar, honey, butterscotch, and a soft oakiness. The taste starts off with a nice touch of butterscotch, followed by cinnamon and allspice notes, and touches of oak and honey in the background. The spices fade away smoothly on the finish with hints of honey and oak. And I'm scoring the West Cork 10-year-old Irish Single Malt an 89. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. Family-owned from the start, and proud to work with other family-owned companies on the Grain to Glass project. They're working with Beck's Hybrid and Peterson Farms to find unique seeds, grow them, and then distill them into a special whiskey. Follow the project's progress at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. The Egan's 15-year-old Legacy Reserve Irish Single Malt is the latest release from the Egan family, which has been working over the last several years to rebuild the family's Irish whiskey brand. This one is bottled at 42% ABV, and it's sourced from an undisclosed Irish distillery. The nose, light and clean, with a hint of ginger root, and touches of dried fruits, and a nice maltiness. The taste is warm with a nice oakiness and hints of clove, allspice, and ginger root, along with honey, vanilla, and touches of butterscotch. The finish is slightly astringent with lingering spices, honey, and a hint of caramel. I'm scoring the Egan's Legacy Reserve 15-year-old Irish Single Malt a 92. Now, I first heard about the Irish-American whiskey earlier this year in Boston when I met the U.S. importers for the brand. It's a collaboration between the Bostonians and the Dubliners to create a blended Irish whiskey, and frankly, I've seen it more prominently here in Kilkenny than I have in the U.S. It's bottled at 40% ABV, and the nose has notes of ginger root, straw, butterscotch, and a hint of caramel. The taste is creamy and smooth with a spicy burst that comes alive slowly with notes of allspice, lemon pepper, and balancing notes of honey and butterscotch in the background. The finish is soft and light with a touch of oak, honey, and subtle spices. I'm scoring the Irish-American Original Irish Whiskey an 87. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,300 different whiskeys from around the world. You'll find it at whiskycast.com.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. And I thought it would be appropriate to share some of the comments others have posted about Dave Pickerell's passing on social media. Our friend Susanna Skyver-Barton at Whiskey Advocate tweeted this: "Can't believe I won't be getting a bear hug from Dave tonight at Whiskey Fest. What a massive loss for whiskey, and for those of us who knew and loved him." Another fellow spirits writer, Amanda Schuster, tweeted this: "Incredibly sad news, a legend and a sweetheart. This leaves a big hole in the whiskey world for sure. Thanks for everything, Mr. Pickerell." Cocktail guru David Wondrich tweeted this: "Deeply saddened to hear of the death of my friend Dave Pickerell. a man who knew everything there is to know about the art and science of distillation, and a million other things besides. There is none other like him. Sit tibi terra levis, amice meus. By the way, the translation from Latin is, "May the ground be light to you, my friend," a traditional Latin blessing for the dead. After we updated our story at whiskycast.com Friday night with Metallica's plans to go ahead with their distillery in the Bay Area and name it for Dave, Ryan Campbell at rcampbell919 tweeted this: "Sad day as a legend is lost. Great tribute from Metallica. Till Valhalla, soldier." Canadian Club's Tish Harkis posted this note on our Facebook page: "I met Dave in his previous job, and this man certainly knew good whiskey and how to make it. Good memories with him and that big laugh. Rest now, Dave, and fly with the other angels, enjoying our whiskeys." In addition, many of the distilleries Dave worked with over the last decade posted tributes on their websites. Whistlepig CEO Jeff Kozak shared this tribute: "Dave was a veteran, a patriot, a storyteller par excellence, and a visionary. We had a lot of fun, too, whether it was talking life, family, and whiskey as we sipped Boss Hogg on a frosty winter's evening around the bonfire behind the guest house, or Dave belting out Billy Joel's Piano Man during a karaoke session at the all-company retreat, or all of us having a laugh at one of Dave's many appearances in costume to promote our latest releases. Who can ever forget Dave in a skin-tight Zorro costume, leaping out at the League of the Flying Pig party, proclaiming, 'Behold, the Black Prince has arrived.' Dave will be remembered by the world and by history as the Johnny Appleseed of the craft whiskey movement." Of course, there was always Dave's annual tradition to wind up Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans, a full-on belly dive into the pool at the Hotel Monteleone. He made a big splash wherever he went. If you have memories of Dave Pickerell or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and other things that make whiskey unique. It's presented by Writer's Tears, distilled just a few miles up the road from here in County Carlow, Ireland. Dave Pickerell certainly made whiskey unique, and there will never be another one like him. I first met Dave in 2006, just a few months after starting WhiskyCast, and over the years, it became more than just a news source or an interview subject. He became a friend. A few years ago, right after my father passed away in 2012, I ran into Dave at a conference in Louisville, and he gave me one of those big bear hugs he was known for. You see, he cared about his friends, and even more, he cared about the people he made whiskeys for, people like you. He wanted to make every whiskey as good as he could, because he knew that when that bottle was opened, it might be for someone trying a whiskey for the very first time, and he did not want to leave them disappointed. If you were a newcomer to whiskey and met him at a tasting or a festival for the very first time, he treated you with the same respect that he showed to his longtime friends. And while cynics may snicker at the black noise sound treatment that he came up with for Metallica's Blackened American Whiskey, he always had sound science in mind when he sat down to create a whiskey. Yes, that pun was intended. Dave loved to laugh, and he loved to hear other people laugh too. The highest compliment I can pay Dave Pickerell as a distiller, of all the whiskeys I've tasted over the years, I can honestly say that he never made a bad one. The highest compliment I can pay him as a friend, I'll never know anyone else quite like him. The last time I saw Dave was at Bourbon and Beyond in Louisville at the end of September. We poured a couple of drams of Blackened and his latest Whistle Pig Boss Hog Rye, the Spirit of Mauve, and with all the audio gear put away, we just sat down and talked. His eyes lit up when I told him how much I liked Blackened, and as our time was running out, I asked him whether he thought he'd ever be inducted into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. He thought about it for a moment, aloud as how it would be a great honor, but that was something that was beyond his control. There are a lot of things that are beyond our control. I was in a cab here in Kilkenny this weekend. John Timmons was behind the wheel, and we were talking about the podcast, and I mentioned that I'd be devoting a lot of this episode to a friend of mine who had just passed away. John told me something his grandmother used to say. We put our boots on in the morning, but we never quite know who will be taking them off. It's a reminder to live each day to the fullest, the way Dave Pickerell did. Rest well, my friend. Rest well. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this episode of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the Whiskey Cast Tasting Panel podcast and our Whiskey Cast HD videos at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, events, photos, and much more, including a complete archive of all of our past episodes, all the way back to 2005. Please take some time this week to leave a review or a rating for Whiskey Cast wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to show a friend how to use that podcast app on their phone to discover not only Whiskey Cast, but a whole world of free content. In the meantime, you'll find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is Whisky, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Whisky Cast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Whiskey Cast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week, usually from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. But this time around, I'm at the Dillon Whiskey Bar in Kilkenny, Ireland. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.